Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. This is Salim Badat. I'm here with my esteemed guest, Brother Ebrahim Jadwat, and this is Living Islam. So this is my third series. Today we're going to discuss the personality of the Prophet. Who was he? It's for those who don't know him. Who was this Prophet of ours? And those who know him to also understand what does the Sunnah of the Prophet actually mean. Welcome, Brother Ebrahim. So I think you can start with explaining maybe the background of his childhood, his childbirth, and what made him special from there.
You see, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The most important thing to understand is that the Prophet's entire life was in the full glare of history. The full glare of history means nothing from his life has not been recorded in detail. The problem is that we focus on some things but not on other things. So in his childhood, it was unfortunate that his father passed away when he was still in his mother's womb, and his mother gave birth to him and very soon sent him out, as it was a practice of the people of that time, to the desert, where for 4 years he stayed. And the lady that took the Prophet ﷺ, she was unlucky from her point of view initially, where as an orphan, what could they give her, because this was a form of earning for the people that were doing it. But as soon as they went, so everything changed, and the life of this family, the last choice was the Prophet. Their life changed, the circumstances changed, and everything changed.
So am I correct in this understanding that all children at that time were sent to the desert for their upbringing, right? And so he was the only orphan at that time. So because of him being the only orphan, he was the last choice. Am I correct?
Yes, because an orphan doesn't have a father or a mother and can't afford to pay these people. So in the end, reluctantly they took the Prophet ﷺ because there was nobody else left. So the Prophet ﷺ, as soon as he joined the group, their lives changed, their circumstances changed, their wealth, they became very wealthy in the time, and so they were so happy with the Prophet ﷺ. And we know the incident where the Prophet ﷺ was a child, right? The angels visit him, open his chest and remove the organ from his body, right? Now that's an incident recorded, and also the children that observed this, they saw this incident happening where his chest was open. So it's just an idea that from what age? Now remember, the Prophet ﷺ was a shepherd from the time he's a child. And all Anbiya, when you look at their lives,
all the prophets of God were shepherds. And
being a shepherd means you are taught the fundamentals of protecting your flock, caring for your flock, looking after the weak, and making sure there's no errant people, making sure. So the great lesson for all the prophets that we learn is that they were shepherds. And the shepherds have so much that they learn looking after the flock.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. So I think, before prophethood came to him, what was he regarded as? What were the titles that people would give him before prophethood came to him?
You see, he was a person that never spoke a lie. And he was a person that always was honest and truthful. So he was called a Sadiq and Adami, the truthful and honest person, throughout his childhood, right? So he was brought up with this nobility, and he was known, even when he was a young person. The Meccan Quraysh at the time had a problem about who would place the black stone in the Kaaba. And there were arguments that there was going to be a fight, right? So one of the people of Quraysh, this is before Islam, said, let's see, the one that walks in now, we'll appoint him. And who walks in? The noble Prophet Muhammed, he walks in. And so they called him and they said, we have to place this black stone. Now the black stone is not an idol. It goes back millennia. So it was there and it had to be placed. Now look at the wisdom of the Prophet ﷺ. As a young person, he put a cloth on the floor, he put the black stone on top of it, and he asked all of the people to hold a portion of his cloth, and he placed that with all of them. This is the wisdom of the Prophet.
And the diplomacy of
the diplomacy. So imagine what status he had. But at the same time, we should remember he was an orphan. And the Arab of that time, the Quraysh Arab of the time, had no value for the prophets. For the orphans. So he was a person, he was remembered almost like an outcast. Not a person that had respect in the society from the point of view of his lineage. Although he came from Quraysh, from a deep background, right? Descendant of Ebrahim and all of this, but being an orphan made him to be an outsider, not an insider.
So, another thing, now when revelation came, so I want you to explain two things, right? First, when revelation came to him, when Ibrahim al-Islam, Gabriel came to him and the verse of Ikra, Ikra, Allah Ta'ala instructs him to read. But also what's very interesting, and it's for those who don't know that, after getting revelation, his reaction, and also the part that his wife, Khadija, Allah bless her, and how he went to her for comfort. So you can explain a bit of that. So a lot of people have a misconception about Islam and women. So here is our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
All right. Also remember that as soon as he was able to, he went with his uncle Abu Talib on trading missions.
Right.
So the caravan,
right.
They went from there and they ended up in Syria and beyond. Now on the way, what are you looking at? You're looking at people, you're looking at civilizations, you're looking at behavior, you're looking at conduct. He's observing with a keen eye all these things and absorbing it. And he was so intelligent in understanding things that when you pass through a territory, you had to pay the chiefs like a protection money. You had to pay them because you were going through everything.
Yeah.
So when they left Jerusalem and they were on the way, that chief, his uncle Abu Talib was about to give the chief money for protection to go through. And the Prophet said, no, there is another party who have drifted from this party and they will be attacking us because you are paying one party, not the other. So this chief is telling the Prophet, but how do you know that? See how this ilham, intuition the Prophet had, that he knew there was another party on the other side who will attack them. So my point is this, that in their journey there was so much to learn. And you know the story of Buhaira, right? He was a person who had invited Abu Talib and his entourage to a meal. And when they sat down, Buhaira is saying to Abu Talib, but there is somebody missing here. And the Buhaira said, no, there's nobody missing. So when he insisted, then Abu Talib said, no. The only person missing is the herd boy. Can you imagine? Rahmatul lil Alameen, the greatest of the greatest creation of Allah. They were not going to allow him the opportunity to sit with them at that table by saying that he's a herd boy. So Buhaira said, no, call him. I want to see him. So as soon as he came, he picked up his shirt and the sign of the Prophet was there. So even then, he was still a herd boy.
So there's two lessons here, right? One is the respect that they had, or the disrespect that they had for.
Well, let us say they didn't have respect for orphans as a whole.
As a whole. But also, what about, so obviously now the Christian monk, Buhaira, did the scriptures mention something of the coming of the Prophet? Is there something in the scriptures?
No, they knew it.
So where is it when it's referred to when Jesus speaks of the Comforter? Is this one of them?
Yes. You see, they all knew it. Like when the Prophet comes shaking from the cave of Hira.
So now we're talking about the revelation coming to him, right?
When he comes shaking, who does he go to? He doesn't go to Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. He doesn't go to the chiefs. He goes straight to his wife, Khadija. how much respect he had for her, the leadership qualities that she had, and the respect and love that she had. So when the Prophet ﷺ is shaking and saying, he feels that the devil has trapped him. And Bibi Khadija, noble Khadija, saying, no, you are too good a human being for Satan to get hold of you. You care for people, you care for the orphan, you care for the widows. This is not something that you should be afraid of. She gave him comfort and love and made him feel that what he heard and what he saw had meaning. And immediately thereafter, she took the Prophet Muhammad to her uncle, right? And her uncle, who was a Christian, and they all knew the coming of the Prophet, right? So the uncle is saying to the Prophet, I wish I was a young man, because he's an old man, to protect you from what you're going to go through.
And this is the priest.
This is the uncle of the Prophet.
Oh, uncle of the Prophet.
Uncle of Khadija. Right. This is at the time when the Prophet came down from Hira.
So he was a Christian.
Yeah, he was a Christian, and he knew the coming of the Prophet. And he said that I wish I was a young man, so I could support you, strengthen you. All prophets of God came and they were persecuted. So this is people that had knowledge of the Christian beliefs and traditions and anticipation, but with Khadija's uncle, to imagine how much she understood the value of going to this Christian uncle and making him understand what the Prophet went through. And then that Christian explains to the Prophet that you are chosen by God, and many like you that were chosen by God suffered persecution. I wish I was young so I could be by you and protect you. He already accepted the fact because he knew that the Prophet was coming. So this is something that that we should understand, that it wasn't unknown to the people of the book, especially the Christians, right? And of course the Jews, that there was a Prophet to come. But here's Bibi Khadija's leadership and the comfort that she gives and the protection that she gives. And after that, first of all, after the Prophet married, all and everything that she owned was given in amana to the Prophet. And the Prophet gave until there was nothing left. So this Khadija, giving the wealthiest lady in the whole of Arabia at the time, giving all her mal and her wealth into the hand of the Prophet, right? So it's a lesson that before Nabuwwat, the Prophet did a lot of charity work. And one of the things that when he was asked later, after Nabuwwat, after he became Islam, that this organization called Hilful Fudul, right, that you were part of in the time of before Islam. Tell us, he said it was the organization that cared for the orphans, the widows, the wayfarers, the travelers, the slaves, all the weak in society. This organization was there for their protection, and the Prophet ﷺ was part of the organization. This is before Islam. And he said, if this organization exists today, I'll join it again. So what was his mind already? Caring for the orphan, caring for the widow, caring, not looking at, they were not Muslims. They were just people.
What did the Prophet ﷺ say when he became a prophet, of course? What did he say about the orphan in your home and the rewards? If you can just...
You see, he himself being an orphan understood the isolation, the poverty, the isolation, and looking down upon the orphan. So he himself was an orphan, understood how difficult it was, how sad it was for a person who was an orphan. So he said that the one in whose home an orphan is brought up with love and care will come on the day of judgment to me like this, and he put his two fingers. The value of the orphan in the eyes of the Prophet, and the encouragement that he gave, always caring for the children, always caring for the orphan, putting his hand on children. They said when the Prophet was sitting with saw a group of children, small children, he would sit there and you would think that he's a child. So much feeling for children. So they said that when he was among the children, as if he was a child. So look at how he was, right? And remember something. There is not an incident in which the Prophet ﷺ raised his hands to his wives. Not once did he rebuke them. He cooked himself. He mended his own clothes. He cleaned his house. He never made any demands on his wives. He was a caregiver. He was a person that was so embracing that he made no demand. Even the servant that he had, he said, he had to beg the Prophet, what can I do for you? What can I do for you? Because the Prophet wouldn't allow him to do anything. He was there, but he was not able to command and give.
What about the respect he gave to widows? Married so many of them, but also the respect by his example.
You see, understand that in the history of civilizations, not Islam, one country or one people conquered another people. So the Persians conquered the Greeks,
right,
and the Persians conquered the Romans.
Right.
So when you conquered another country and other people, those people became your slaves, right? And they became your property. So it was no value, and it was a property thing with which they traded. So they traded a slave, sold, bought, and so forth. It was a commercial thing. But in the wars that took place, and in any wars, men died and women were left, widows were left. So what to do about these widows? So he encouraged people to marry the widows so that they would have care and they would have protection of those whose husbands had passed away and those who were left defenseless. So he was always caring for the widows. And the organization he had was caring for the widows, the orphans, and the wayfarer and the traveler.
Okay, now, so we've touched on a few topics. We've touched on the prediction of the Christians, of the coming of the Prophet, the Christian monk. We spoke about the revelation and also the importance of a woman, his wife, Khadija. We touched on that. We touched on the orphans and the importance of the orphans and how he loved them, the widows. Now I want to talk to you about the concept of racism in Islam. So what was his relationship and how did he obliterate this form of racism that existed in that time and exists now too? But what was his relationship with Hazrat Bilal?
You see,
I'm placing him as the Muazzin, but what was his relationship and what did he teach the Meccans or the Arabs at the time? They were very racist also. So what was his example?
You see, the Prophet the Quran is telling you, I have made you into nations and tribes so that you may recognize each other, not that you must despise each other. Inna akramakum inna Allah al-Kaam. The best of you is the best, the one who has the highest degree of taqwa, highest degree of consciousness. Now in
God
that
consciousness, yes.
God consciousness, right? There are many meanings of taqwa, but for me it's God consciousness, right? Now in the people that we at the time slaves were bought and sold like goods.
Yeah.
And they came from all places. People that were from Persia brought slaves, people that were from Greece brought slaves, people that were from Rome. So the slaves were of mixed hues, right? But we also know that in this part of the world, there were people of Abyssinian and Egyptian origin who were there. For example, we know that Ebrahim alayhi salam married Hagar, who happened to be Egyptian.
Sure.
Right. So what was she? Technically, she was not a white person.
No.
Although the Arab himself was not a white person.
Sure.
But she was of a different kind, right? Maybe regarded as what we might call in loose terms, which I don't like, colored, or maybe of mixed race, or maybe black, right? So Ibrahim alayhi salam already, he showed by example when he married Bibi Hagar, and the child that came from the Ismail, from whom our lineage comes. So you came from a mixed background, a background of people who were not your kind. She came from another kind. And remember also, when the Prophet ﷺ sent messengers all over the world, after he went to Medina, he sent messengers all over the world.
Sorry.
And,
A bit louder.
yeah, so he sent messengers all over the world. And the messengers that he sent, this is from Medina. One page like this, with the messenger to the king, to the ruler, to the president, to whoever was the head of that state. And the message was very simple. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, I, Muhammad ibn Abdullah, the servant of God and the messenger, invite you to Islam. Accept Islam and you will have success in this life and in the next, and so forth. Now you can see that exact letter in the Topkapi Museum in Istanbul. Exact letter. That's all, a small letter, inviting a whole country. So how did they react to it? Some reacted positively, some reacted not too concerned, and some reacted with anger.
So we know the Persians reacted with anger.
Anger, yeah.
The Romans at that time
also reacted unfavorably.
Unfavorably.
So you must understand that all of these people, imagine a Muslim ruler is sending a message to President of the United States, right? Yeah, I'm inviting you to Islam. Does he have the guts? Does he have the capacity? Does he have the respect? That man you're inviting is the President of the country. So the two civilizations that were the power civilizations, like we have today here, was the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire. And these two empires were now angry at these upstarts. Who are you that you want to ask us to join you? Who are you? So when the Persian emperor, right, was so angry, he said, look, in the past, you came, you raided our territories, we gave you some goods and you went away. So let me give you some more goods. And the companion that was there said, oh, with respect, we have not come for land, we have not come for goods, we have come to free the human being from the worship of human being to the worship of God. We've come to free the human being from the injustices of man to the justice of God. And that was the speech that he made. This person was so angry. So he started sending armies, right? So on the one side, Prophet was dealing with the Persians, on the other side he was dealing with the Romans. But before that, he was dealing with all the Arab tribes who had all ganged up. And one after the other they were attacking. So imagine in 10 years, he spent 10 years in Medina. Now this is, when we talk about the Sunnah, understand what the Sunnah is. Do you think he was sitting on the Musalla hitting the tasbih? That he did with the other
So what he actually means is, do you think he was just praying? There was more to praying, correct?
Yeah, for 10 years, the attack was coming from every corner of the Arabian Peninsula. From the tribes, from the Quraysh on one side, joining up with the tribes and joining up with the Jews, to other tribes all over the Arabian Peninsula. So they were attacking. And now came the big attack. The Persians came for him. The Romans. Imagine these people who never fought in their lives outside of their own tribal skirmishes are now confronting the biggest civilizations of the time, empire, Persian Empire, and the Roman Empire, and defeating both of them.
In his lifetime, when he was 10 years.
Is that not a sunnah?
Absolutely.
10 years.
How many
over
wars?
60 wars. 60 defensive wars. When did he have, when did he have time to sit? When did he have time to relax? When did he have time to do the things that we think they were doing? No. He was preparing one war after another, one war after another, one defensive war. Immediately one is over, another one's coming. So he was preoccupied. But what kind of people he had to confront this menace? Understand what kind of soldiers they were. They were powerful people, and they were able to withstand this onslaught. So they were not sissies, they were not softies, they were ready to fight, and the wars were going on. And people may not know, or may know, that Hazrat Umar was the head of the army. And as head of the army, he had to train these people. And one of the things that I keep telling you about is that to be in his army, you have to mount a horse in gallop. The horse is running, you have to mount a horse in gallop. And so you have to be a very, very powerful, strong person. And also remember that the last mission of the Prophet, he sent Osama bin Zayd, the youngest person, 18-year-old, on the biggest event taking place at that time. 18-year-old as the head of the army. Under him were Talha and Zubair and all his great companions, elderly people with an 18-year-old boy. Look at the genius of the Prophet, that he picked this boy to lead the army. And remember also that in the time of Omar, this is intuition. In the time of Shia, we don't know mind, what the mind is, and how you develop the mind. So Omar bin Khattab is delivering the lecture, the khutbah. And in the middle of the khutbah, he raises his hand and he says, Sariya, look to the mountain. Sariya, look to the mountain. People are shocked. In Medina, Sariya was a general. He was on his trip to Syria, hundreds of kilometers away. And here Umar is saying, Sariya, look to the mountain. So when Sariya comes back, they ask him, in the middle of this khutbah, Omar is saying, he said, yes, I heard a clear voice. I heard a clear voice from Omar, look to the mountain because it was a trap. Right? And they were going to waylay, ambush. So he withdrew and they were able to overcome it. So I'm trying to say that this army of his was an army that was made up of really strong people. People that were able to conquer two of the world's superpowers. So what kind of an army did they produce?
Also, you mentioned how the Prophet could select the correct people for the correct jobs. Like you speak of the marketplace. I'm not sure if we covered it in a second, but very briefly, the importance of the marketplace and how the Prophet elected Hazrat Umar and who he elected amongst the five, and the purpose of the marketplace and the masjid.
Well, this is something that I want to deal with in detail.
Okay, so
because it's a subject that teaches you civilization.
Right.
The Prophet was built from Medina, Masjid in Medina. We know that, everybody knows that.
Yes.
But the next most important thing he did was to build the market of Medina, which became the center of life and civilization, and people with trades, and people with skills, and people with all kinds of things came to trade there, and it was an organized institution. First, free market. And Omar bin Khattab, we asked some people, what